you guys want to get started? You need to, do you need, like, we're already up, this is already up and running. All right, great. All right, well, thanks everybody for coming this evening, really appreciate it. I guess the last time we had a community meeting was this summer, was in late July. So this is kind of the second one that we have for our recreational master plan exercise that we started. Probably when was like
pretty much July was when we started.
Pretty much July was like the first time frame that we began the exercise with Time Bond. And we've been working with them on a weekly basis. The commissioners meet monthly to kind of review some of the work that they've done. A community survey went out to everybody. I don't know when that was. These guys will cover that, but this tonight really is just turning over to Time Bond to explain kind of the survey results, and we want it to be as interactive as possible. So we're going to open it up for everyone here also to have any questions, and I guess like if there's anything during the presentation as well, if there's anything, you can raise your hand and ask questions as well. I didn't introduce myself. I'm Rob Lebath. I'm the chair of the Parks Commission, and I'll let these guys go ahead and introduce themselves.
I'm Ted Carroll, one of the commissioners.
Carolyn Cahill, a commissioner.
And then the park staff is here as well.
Bonnie DeVore, principal clerk.
Kevin Chisholm, art director.
Paul DeMano, rec director.
And then I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Time Bond and Ryan and Allie. I think Ryan's going to speak, so no, I think we're already open. Yeah.
Rob, thank you very much. Appreciate the introduction. My name is Ryan Morrison. I'm from Time Bond. Some of you I may have met in that previous meeting. My colleague, Ali, is here. She'll be doing some of the presenting on some of the slides. As Rob talked about, we're kind of a little bit past midway of this process. We've been able to survey the community, and most of our presentation tonight is going to be about the survey results that we got back from the community. When we get these survey results, we get a lot of data back, and we want to make sure we tell the community what we saw and give the community an opportunity to say, hey, you heard us, or hey, you didn't hear us, right? Like, this is our opportunity to kind of flush out what we heard from that data. And so we're going to review survey results for all the different questions that we've asked the community. And we're also going to talk a little bit about what we heard from coaches. One of the processes that we've undergone throughout the winter was we reached out to all the coaches of the different rec groups. And we spent some time talking to them, whether it was a half hour or an hour, depending on which group they were or what how the discussion went. We spent time talking to them. So we'll spend a little bit of time at the end of this presentation talking about what we heard from the coaches and summarizing that. Before we get started, I'll start. Next slide, one way or another. Well, before I go into schedule, I want to talk a little bit about the different sections of the survey that we're going to talk about today. One was community respondents and profile. The second section was regarding park use and recreation patterns. The third was field condition and maintenance needs. And the fourth was future recreational needs and community priorities. Just out of curiosity, of the folks that are in this room, how many completed the survey? Okay, so good cross section of the folks here today. Thank you for completing the survey. It's very helpful. Okay, that works. Talk a little bit about what we've been doing. Rob said we got started in July, and here we are all the way in March. And what the heck has happened? Sorry. We had project kickoff activities between July 1st and September 1st. We were one of that presentation we had on July 29th. You'll see the community meeting down there in the lower left-hand corner. From September 1st to October 31st, we made different site visits. Time Bond staff has visited each one of the sites, assessed condition, assessed drainage, assessed turf condition, assessed safety. And we're also keeping our eye on what were the opportunities for development of these parks, whether it was expansion of facilities, reorienting facilities to make them work better for the community, or did they overall have a condition need? We worked with Bonnie during August to do a project website development. So there's a website up there with information available to the community. We've been doing data collection since July. We've looked at old reports was one of the points of data that we're looking at. So what other master plan studies have said, what other open space and rec plans? And I don't think we want to get into too much right now, but I think there's an open space and rec plan that's in the process that Rob's working on with the planning department. And so obviously we'll want to incorporate that information into this master plan as well. And then we started this community survey. The community survey went live on December 1st. It stayed up all the way through March 1st or March 4th, sorry. And since March 4th, we've been kind of analyzing the data, putting together this presentation. The one-on-one rec group data collection is all the coaches that we've talked to. That process took kind of a long time, but we've got an opportunity to talk to the majority of the coaches that hold rec groups in the community. And here we are today on March 25th talking to our second community meeting. What do we have left? That's the next question. What do we have in progress? What do we have left? That's what I should say. We have community partnership discussions. We'll talk about what a community partnership is a little bit later in more detail, but the community has a number of partners that are private that help serve some of the athletic field needs. Examples of this is Milton Academy, Cunningham Park, and Curry College. We still want to talk to those folks a little bit more. Now that we've had an opportunity to talk to all the coaches and understand their uses of those facilities, we want to touch base with those folks. We're updating existing conditions mapping. The existing conditions mapping update was originally we pulled orthographic imagery of the sites and we pulled some general data about parcel lines. But now that we've been able to talk to the coaches, what other things did we learn about these sites? What other information do we want to provide those existing conditions? And we also want to look at topography and wetlands and environmental conditions that may prevent any growth of those facilities. So that's what we're working on at the moment for existing conditions, mapping updates. And then facility and use evaluation analysis. This is something that's really been started before March. We probably should have changed that date a little bit. That's my fault. But we've been talking about facility use and its overall condition since basically we did the site walks in September, right? We've made this initial assessment of what the condition safety, but at that time we didn't know what they were used for. You know, a baseball field for a T-ball game has to look a lot different than for a high school baseball game. And so now that we've gotten to talk to everybody and say, okay, here's who's playing in these fields and here's who's using them. Now we want to go back and look at the lens of condition and understand that a little bit better. What do we have left to do? Based on the coaches, the conversations with the coaches and the survey, we now have a general idea, or we're getting a general idea of what we need for additional facilities. I will tell you that the general consensus amongst the community and the coaches is that there needs to be a facility expansion. The majority of the coaching leagues are having a hard time meeting practice needs, and we'll get into that in a little bit, but increase in fields is what we're looking for. The question is, what can we get and what do we really need and how do those two numbers meet? So we'll be working on that with the Parks Commission over the next month. Once we understand what we can get out of facilities and what we need, we'll be able to draft a facilities report that makes a recommendation to the board. Here's what you can get, here's what we think you need to get in addition. I think, Rob, we're on the schedule for a town meeting discussion on May 6th. And then with an eye of wrapping up the final facilities assessment report by end of May.
Yep.
Does anybody have any questions about that schedule or what's included in that scope? I don't know if we can see people online or if there's enough.
I don't see them.
Can people online hear us?
I hope so.
Check the chat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see any hands up.
So Ally, you were gonna go over these next couple.
Yep. So moving on to community profile. I don't know if I introduced myself, but I'm Ally Cook. I'm a planner with Pine and Bond. So I work on a lot of community engagement projects, local comprehensive plans and municipal planning. So the survey was originally developed in late fall, and we went through a few iterations of the survey in a different software program, which is called Survey 123. And as we were going through and testing the questions and going through the drafts, we decided to move to SurveyMonkey as our platform. We thought that was more accessible for people to use both on cell phones and on their laptops. And our goal was to collect as much information as possible across the widest range of groups. So the survey was distributed to a wide array of groups. So Bonnie helped distribute it to Milton's departments, Council on Aging, public library,
High school.
youth groups, the youth task force, To try to capture, as many age ranges as possible. In total, we had 1,315 respondents. And that was between when the survey was open and the beginning of January, and it closed on March 4th. So it's a great number of respondents to feedback. The highest response rates were received right in the beginning, and on the Survey Monkey tool, you can kind of see the analytics on the back end. So highest responses are right in the beginning, and then we had another push through social media platforms and through the website. I think there were some email blasts, and we saw another peak in early February. So all around, great feedback that we received. So when asked about your respondent type going through the survey, the majority, almost 80%, were parents or guardians of youth athletes. Residents who use public facilities were the next highest. And it's important to note that throughout the questions, many of them had select all that apply. So the percentages are not quite exact because they do capture more information, just because we wanted to collect all of the different types of responses we could get per person. Other respondent types were youth sports spectators, poetry team volunteers, schedulers, or other. We had an open drop-down box for people in the other category. So some people self-identified as grandparents of youth athletes, dog walkers, general residents, and abutters.
And just to clarify that note from Ally, you'll often see survey results that don't add up to 100, so I just don't want you to be alone with that. The math doesn't work.
Okay, so moving on for age distribution. The majority of respondents, which makes sense based on the last slide, about 71% were in the age range from 35 to 54. About 15% were ages 55 to 65 plus. Let's see, less than 1% were in the 18 to 34 age range. That was the smallest. Youths under 18 was about 4%. So again, you can see that the majority were in the middle category. Do you have any other?
Yeah, I guess I would say that this is not an atypical split. I think we would, based on our respondents from other communities when we do these surveys, we would have maybe seen a little bit more youth participation in surveys, but I think in this case, what we're seeing is that the parents took the surveys on behalf of the youth rather than the youth taking the survey. Not atypical to get low respondents from that 18 to 34 range. Usually they're either out of college playing on those fields, or they don't have a kid that's playing on the rec level field, and so it's not uncommon to not see a good response from that group. But other than that, I think the age range and the distribution seems similar to what we see in other communities. Does anybody have any questions about those slides?
Moving on to the numbers when it comes to programs that have most participation or highest affiliation. Soccer came in at 58%, followed by basketball and baseball. So let's see for the split. Pickleball was on the lower end. I don't have the exact percentage here, but pickleball.
Or 30-15.
Yes, that was the number of respondents for the survey. Then Gaelic football, I believe, was the lowest respondent category. But based on conversations we've had with the committee, that has been the trend that soccer, baseball have fallen towards the top.
I think this is what we see from our conversations with the coach. One of the things we broke baseball and softball out. But in some ways that field type is very similar for say youth baseball versus youth softball. And both of those groups are hurting for field space. And so I think when you combine that, baseball and softball group together and the youth soccer group together, they're those numbers are quite similar in size, and those are both the groups that I think are. I don't want to say the only groups looking for space. I think just about everybody wants more space. But from the numbers we're seeing, I think those are the groups looking for the most amount of field space. Go ahead, Alex. Do you have anything else?
And then all of the questions had opportunities for other types of respondents, to give their feedback if they were not a youth athlete. So, lots of respondents came in for walking, dog walking, we mentioned that earlier. People, noted that they love to hike, lots of playground use came up. People are doing a lot of biking, running, informal field play, fishing, those types of things. So those were like the broader categories that weren't necessarily reflected in the sports section.
I also want folks to like, these numbers have to be looked through a lens, right? And so if we had, what was it, 1,300 total responses, Ally?
Yes.
You know, when you look at, say, pickleball, and we say that's one of the lower respondents, well, that's 10% of the community that did. You know, did answer, so that's a sizable section of the community that needs to be served. So I don't want, these numbers have more behind them than we're just presenting. I just want to make sure that we're not discouraging anybody and say, oh, you know, pickleball or Gaelic football is low. You know, we're looking through a different lens than just their high or low numbers. Did you cover other activities already, Ellie? Sorry, but
Yes.
okay. Any questions from the public about that slide?
This one, we don't need to spend too much time on. This was a question about popular recreational activities, which tracks with all of the other things that we've seen. I don't really have much to add. to this one.
Yeah, I think it's kind of an expansion on the previous slide where we asked the other. One of the things I think, you know, what we're hearing from the public here is that, and obviously we get more detail in the version of this data than we're getting here. But when we do make improvements to the park, one of the things we need to start working into those improvements is walking circulation around the outside. So there's a path for parents to walk while the kids are playing. Making sure that there's playgrounds so that parents who may have older kids, you know, in an athletic sport have a place for the younger kids to play at the same time. We want to host community events at the park, right? Like, you know, not just athletic events, but we want to, you know, have opportunities for, I saw comments in there for bands and music and other activities other than just athletic activities. And then focus on picnic areas, right? Like, where can people have a party at a park if they want to have a birthday party? And, you know, I think there is some opportunities right now, but maybe we want to expand upon that. One of the things we'll get back to is the dog walking. Right now, one of the comments we've got from a lot of the rec groups is that the dog walking is being done on the athletic fields themselves. And so that creates a maintenance issue for both the rec department and for the youth groups to keep up. And so maybe a dedicated dog walking space, which I don't know what we've talked completely about with the recognition at the moment, but maybe that works for this town or maybe it doesn't, but that's something certainly we want to explore. And then outdoor fitness in the yoga.
Moving on. We had additional questions about parks that were used the most frequently and the reasons why. And we don't have all the data included in the graphics that are captured here. So to start with what we have, Cunningham Park, Kelly Field, and Andrews Park were the three parks listed as the most used parks. Parks in the additional category were Blue Hills, Hope's Pond, Pine Tree Brook Path, and Ponkapog, I don't know how to pronounce that, Pond, for the other categories that people could have open-ended responses to. And I think you did this probably a little more than me.
One other note though too is that the commissioners split up the high school into like smaller areas. So if we just put the high school together, you would see that number be
It would be the highest use.
It would be the highest use because we have this one. There's a ton of that.
But I think that tracks with the amount of spaces that are provided at each one of those facilities, right? Andrews Park is one of your larger parks. Cunningham Park is one of your largest parks in the community, even though it's a private park. Kelly Field is very large, and then obviously your high school is big. The other parks are, I don't wanna call them pocket parks, but smaller facilities.
Yeah.
And Ally, did you note that the blue bars indicate that those are private institutions? Okay, so Cunningham Park and Milton Academy and Curry College, we just wanted to know, are not town-owned recreational facilities. They're town or state ones, I should say, but they're in the state one here, but they're private facilities. The whole town partnership from business, yeah. And so we just want to call those out as different, we have different opportunities to improve there, so we just want to make sure that the public knows that. Next slide.
Primary reasons for park use. So in the SurveyMonkey tool, I'm sure you all went through and had these big tables where you could look at each park and identify which reason you use the park as you're going through. So we have feedback for each park based on proximity and convenience, field condition, if it has good scheduling and availability, amenities like lighting, parking, or bathroom access. Another category for if there is a lead group or organization for scheduling, and then a not applicable category just for that that don't apply. So let's see here. Other reasons included passive recreation, scenic, well landscaped and used amenities, pickleball courts, batting cages, etc., or other reasons that people were drawn to certain parks. So we don't have the numbers up here. And I don't know if it makes sense for me to like run through some of.
I wouldn't run through them all, but
Yeah.
there's a couple to highlight.
Yeah, so Andrews Park, for example, I know that was one of the parks on the previous slide. That is used frequently. About 50% of respondents said that they favor that park based on the availability for leagues to use the space. Same thing with Flatley Fields. That was very high for sports teams.
Specifically the youth soccer group, right, which we
Yeah.
found as a high
Yeah.
response rate.
Shields Park, a lot of people favored that because of the proximity or convenience to where they live. Same thing with Cunningham Park. Then Kelly Field, also proximity and convenience, and then things like field condition, scheduling availability kind of varied throughout. There were a lot of not applicable respondents here, probably for those who are not seeking those parks for specific sports activities.
Any questions from the public on that slide? Just want to take them back over, Ellen?
Yes.
Okay. So our next category was field condition and maintenance questions that we asked the public. And so the first question was parks in the best playing condition. Milton Academy got one of the higher ratings. Cunningham Park got a pretty high rating. Of the town-owned facilities, we have Andrews Park, Kelly Field, and the high school. Is this one? No, the high school, those two. I would say this is not unlike other communities. Milton rec facilities have a different maintenance strategy than, say, a private institution can have. And so when you rate those two side by side, you'll often find that the private facilities perform a little bit better. I think in general, when we went and looked at the Milton recreational facilities, I'll tell you what we saw was facilities that could have some improvement. They were aged facilities, but at the time we saw them, they were generally in pretty good shape for a recreational facility, a town-owned facility. There could be improvements made, and there could be, some things certainly that we can work on. But as far as rec level facilities, we've seen all, facilities that were in a lot worse shape. So I think there's probably some things we can work on in updating amenities and things that we talked about on that previous slide, but I don't want the folks to be alarmed when they see the private facilities rate higher than the rec facilities. I think that's really common amongst all towns. When you think about the number of facilities that a town needs to maintain and the staffing levels that they have, it's pretty common. One of the things that I think is really important here when we talk about the responses we got behind the numbers and this is gonna be a theme as we work through this section, as several respondents noted about the overall condition of existing fields. And talked about improved maintenance and upgraded facilities. And so where we're headed with this report is that you definitely don't have enough field space to meet the demand of your rec facilities. And when I talk to these coaches, they basically get on the field when school's out and they stay on it until it's dark. And they're having 3 or 4 teams play on the same field at the same time. And it's probably not viable at this point for you to have a beautiful college level stand of turf when you're putting it through that level of use. Additionally, you're trying to schedule people around rain. And so maybe there's a little bit of impatience on a soggy field that didn't dry out quite as quickly. And if you start to lose it in the spring, you're not going to gain it back until the fall. And so, as much work as you want the Parks and Rec department to put into these fields, they've got to have enough facilities in order to support the demand, or they're never going to be able to keep up, right? You could spend a bunch of money. I won't name a community, but there was a community that I worked for in the past that had so much use on one particular field, they were sodding it like every 5 weeks in order to keep up with it. And the costs were ridiculous, right? It was not sustainable for them to do. And so you need to have the field space to support the rec demand before you can fix all of the maintenance. I'm not saying there's not maintenance issues we could work on, but in order to keep a really good stand of turf and not have bare spots and not have rutting, we would need to have enough field space to support the use. Other things we got noted was kind of the disparaging differences between turf fields and natural turf fields, and obviously the turf fields that the town does have or that are on private facilities have a much more consistent level of play than the natural turf fields. What I will say is for all those ratings that we had on the last page, this kind of tries to sum up what I was saying earlier, is 85% of the respondents said that the fields were either excellent, good, or fair condition. And that's when we asked about town-owned fields. And so, we're summarizing it. We gave you the table on the side. You can see the breakdown. 6.5% of the respondents said excellent, 41% said good, and 37% said fair. But I expect the town rec level fields to stay somewhere between that good and fair condition. Typically, they're not in the excellent condition that you see at a private school or anything like that. Before I keep going, is there any questions about those last 2 slides?
If you go back to the last slide, you're saying that those factors played into the percentages that we see there. So the field quality and playability, is that kind of?
This is some of the commentary we got. So there was like leave a comment if you had a question, if you had something you wanted to say. And so some of them were paragraphs, some of them were sentences. We tried to simplify it for the purposes of public, but the board will have all of those responses so that they can kind of sit through them. But that was generally the comments we got back when a field didn't rate high. It was because of playability, drainage. Any other questions about the last 2 slides? The next question was about fields that were identified as needing improvements. Flatley Field was rated the highest out of this, along with Lower Guile and Kelly Field. Andrew Parks, I would say, also sticks out to me. Flatley Field is where the youth soccer group plays, with youth soccer being one of our largest respondents. I would expect the Flatley Field to stand out as one of the ones that would want improvement. Kelly Field and Andrew Park also rated highly, and we'll be looking at those facilities with the Parks Commission to talk about how we can make expansions or reorientations of the facilities to better suit the community. And then the last one on there is Lower Guile. I think the public kind of knows there's a project out there for Lower Guile and would like to maybe see that project go through. And so that's probably why that one rated the highest. Or rated high. Sure.
Can you just clarify what needing improvement means? So field condition or bathrooms, parking?
the original question was needing improvement, like needs to be improved on, and then I think as a comment section, we've got feedback about whether they needed amenities at those, or they needed restrooms or playgrounds or whatever. But the heart of the question was, which ones would you like us to focus our improvements on? Is that fair?
Because Kelly and Andrews got the highest rating, right? On condition.
Correct.
So that's why it's a little confusing. I was hoping you
I
could
think
explain that.
that makes sense. I see your questions now. I think it has to do with the number of users that are using them, right? If you have if a majority of your groups are using Kelly and Andrews, yes, it may rate higher in condition than say the middle school field, which only has like one group using it. But it also is the group may want to see the most amount of improvements there because they are central to the community. They're kind of like the heart of where recreation is played for. And so that's kind of something we're gonna have to sit through with the group as, you know, like I'm trying to think of one. Shields Park didn't rate high as fields needing improvement, but there was probably not that many respondents that use Shields Park in comparison to Andrews or Kelly. That makes sense?
Hey, Ryan,
Sure.
I think also breaking out some of those fields like Andrews and Kelly's. The respondents who responded, were they softball or were they soccer? Were they baseball or? Because I think Andrews, for instance, might get poor ratings for softball and soccer, but not for baseball. Or Kelly might get poor ratings for baseball or softball, but not for soccer. And
Sure.
you know, so I think also looking at the quality.
That's a good
like,
point. Yeah.
field per se, like what is played. Or lacrosse might say Andrews is great or whatever it is, right? So
Understood.
I think maybe looking at that a little bit more fine tuned would give a different
We
perspective. 'Cause I
tried
feel
to do,
differently.
we tried to do that with the high school, that's why it's divided up into four. But I think, I think it's a good point. But I think it's tough to
We'll have to look at the
continue
raw
to
data.
divide all the data up, I guess.
It's a lot, and some people might have answered first softball field, a baseball field, and a soccer because they have kids.
But that's probably
So it's
why.
hard to qualify each one.
What I think we can do is, I think in the quick data hit that we got from each one, I don't think we have that data. But in the correspondence underneath, we may be able to decipher some of those things you're talking about, right? Like,
Yeah,
did they talk specifically about the soccer field? Or did they talk about the baseball field being in really great condition? So we'll have to look more into that. Thank you. Reasons for poor condition field, we started this conversation a couple slides back, but poor field conditions include uneven surfaces, mud, flooding, and a lack of grass coverage. And then I'm gonna not read the one on the right for a minute, I'm gonna jump to the one below it and say safety concerns have the potential for injuries due to poor field maintenance. So I think those two are back to speaking to the number of uses you have on these natural turf fields and being able to keep up with them. Both of those are speaking to, one, we wanna pick up our maintenance program, but two, we need to provide enough field space so that we can actually have a maintenance program that can keep up. And then the final kind of bullet point there was limited amenities such as inadequate parking, lack of restrooms, and insufficient shade structures. Particularly the one we're seeing, I think the most commentary I saw about lack of parking was Andrews Park, which I think the board kind of pointed out. Our first step out there was, hey, we know we have a parking problem here, how can we look at that? That's one of the things we'll be looking at as we look at ways of improvement. Maintenance and improvement priorities, so we had folks prioritize what was the things they wanted us to look at the most. We did this on a per field basis, if I remember correctly, right?
Yeah.
We just summarized this for the public in kind of like which ones came to the top. Again, you've got natural turf or infield care. For those of you that may not be baseball players, infield is that area of the baseball diamond that's normally clay. Typically that needs to be raked so that you don't have lips or bad ball bounces. It needs to be supplemented around the bases. Natural turf, obviously keeping up with the grass maintenance. Drainage and or grading, there was some commentary about some fields that have poor drainage associated with them. One of the things we were hearing from the athletic groups is they're really up against it when they're playing from 3 to say 6 in the fall. They would really love the opportunity to play till 8. If they had lights, that would open up the opportunity for practices, which we'll talk about in a minute. The problem with that is if you're overusing your field already and you put lights on it to use it more, you're gonna only kill it worse. And so gonna make it almost impossible for these guys to keep up with if we like these fields. So we need to really think about that strategically, whether, whether if it is lighting a natural turf field, taking uses off of it early in the day so that it's not getting overused, or limiting the number of uses on it so you can keep a healthy stand of turf. Or looking at opportunities to light a synthetic turf field that may not already be lit. Restrooms and parking, scheduling or coordination. I think there's been some commentary both in the coaches groups and that we've seen from the survey talking about, would love to be able to get on this field at such and such time, but this team has it booked out and I didn't see them there. So there's a little bit more clarity about scheduling and coordination, and then accessibility improvements for the parks, including the playgrounds. Some of the other categories that we saw was trash and pet waste. A common thread throughout is the amount of pet waste in the parks and finding a way to manage that, and expanded multi-use recreational options. So when I think about that, I think about like fitness courses or the yoga course that we talked about previously, kind of expanding some of those supplemental recreational activities in the parks that maybe are already addressed. Any questions? Sorry to keep asking, I just want to make sure we're not passing by anybody. Then we moved on to future needs and community priorities. I don't think this slide will come as a shock to anybody here, I don't believe. Support for additional fields in the community, whether they're natural turf or synthetic turf, was 80.28%. 20% of the respondents were not in support of additional fields. Support for acquiring fields. I think that's kind of a misprint. My apologies. I think we worded that in the survey as support for the town acquiring more land in order to build more fields. And so that was 82% in support, 17.8% not in support, which I kind of find those two a little bit like who picked one and not the other. Support for additional fields, even with increased staffing needs. One of the things we've been talking about tonight is how do you keep up with these natural turf fields if you want to improve your maintenance field and you want to expand upon it? Do you support increasing the staff in order to maintain it? And I think the community pretty much resounded, yes, we're fully in support of upping the staff if we want to maintain these fields better. This is kind of just like a nice graphic where we actually asked one of our staff to kind of go through and see what they were seeing in the responses from everybody and kind of put this, I call it word salad, but the larger words you see in this word salad were the words we found the most in the responses, where the words you see smaller are words we saw less. And so the things we want to see here are community, green, pet friendly, more amenities, two different ways, family friendly. Trails was interesting, a lot of trails and walking usage. So again, we want to keep up on that, make sure we're not losing that in our site. And then nature and trees. Trees, I think, is speaking to shade and I found the nature piece to it. One of the things I think the board was a little bit cautious about putting in, but we wanted to have this question in, was about community opinion on synthetic turf. Is the community in favor of adding synthetic turf? And the reason we asked this question is that if you don't have enough land to support the number of fields you need to grow, one of the ways to grow field space is to build a synthetic turf field. And synthetic turf field can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but there's been a lot of advances in synthetic turf over the years. And so what a synthetic turf field can do is you can light a synthetic turf field and that will replace about 3 natural turf fields. The data, depending on which community you're talking to, is different, but I would say on average it's about 3. And so if you're not rich on land space, the way to grow field space is to convert some of your natural turf field to synthetic turf. And so we wanted to hear from the community whether that was a possibility at all. And so I think we got a maybe from the community. 28% were, opposed, either strongly opposed or somewhat opposed. And then 73% of the community answered strongly in favor or somewhat in favor. And we have, there was another column or a comment column here, like if it was the only way to make it work, or, really in favor of synthetic turf, or don't want synthetic turf at all. So we have some commentary for the board to kind of see how those respondents may have given a little bit more detail behind that. But I do think it was interesting that we have a large amount of the respondents so in favor. Thank you, Ally, for keeping up. I forgot you got to do that. I just realized. Preferred addition to Milton's rec facilities, the largest respondent here was rectangular activities. At 61%. Again, I want to reach back down a little bit further to baseball and softball. Doing it a little bit prematurely. I would add those two together when you think about number of fields you need to be that 29%-ish range. But then passive activities rated really high, which I thought was interesting and something we're gonna have to talk with the board about how we obtain those passive activities. We've been so focused on how do we meet the needs of the rec group, but we need to make sure we're touching on that as part of this. Other, please specify. We've got some of those on the side there. Dog parks and off-leash dog areas, indoor or year-round recreation facilities. I'll tell you that wasn't part of like what we're trying to study here, but certainly we'll note it in the report, and the commission can build on that as they see fit. But we did see a couple of a number of responses that talked about an indoor facility that allowed folks to play in winter. And then commonly we saw additional soccer field. One of the interesting things that I guess I didn't anticipate when we started this survey was the number of folks that wanted to see more basketball courts. And I think we as the board had talked about whether that's indoor or outdoor, we've got to do a little deciphering. Any questions about that slide? So what are our key takeaways from that survey? From the survey, there's demand for additional field space. There's field and maintenance condition concerns, and I think those go hand in hand. From the public we're hearing, there's the importance of amenities, parking, restrooms, lightings, passive recreation, and then, well, really that plays into the next one, need for balance of athletic fields and open space. And when I think of open space, I think of passive recreation activities, whether that's nature trails or walkway trails or off-leash areas for dogs. There's a ton of things that can fit into that open space area. But we want to make sure we balance those activities in our park so that we're not heavy towards athletic activities. One of the other things I said I wanted to cover as part of this meeting was we talked to coaches from all the different groups. I think we've gotten everybody that we've spoken to on this list, but I'm not positive we've gotten everybody. I didn't make a change to this list, but we've got folks from baseball. We've talked to softball coaches from men's softball and women's softball. We talked to the field hockey youth group, talked to the youth soccer group. We've talked to lacrosse, both girls and boys lacrosse, talked to the youth football and cheerleading groups. I feel like I'm missing someone. The National League and American League baseball teams, we've got two baseball teams for those of you that may not know that, which is a little atypical for a town, but seems to be working. And so what did we hear back from them? The common thread was lack of field space, but the reason I want to talk about that a little bit more is they've kind of been stunting the growth of their own groups in order to make the field space work. So what they've been doing is they've been canceling practices or not having practices and only playing games because they don't have field space to have both all the games they need for their youth groups and practice. And so what they're finding is as kids mature through their leagues, they're losing kids because they're not getting the same opportunity that their young students, the other students would be, or their colleagues would. And so that's stunting their growth by the time they get to 12 or 15 years old, or they get to the high school level. Suddenly they realize they're not competitive because they haven't been practicing at the same level, or they've joined private travel leagues as a result of that, right? And then they're not in Milton rec leagues at all. Other feedback we got was lack of lighting. One of the reasons they can't practice is they can't play at night. Lack of synthetic turf. By and large, the coaches were in favor of an opportunity to play on synthetic turf. And one of the biggest complaints they had was the pet waste on the field. They often show up for a practice or for a game, and they've got to take 10 to 15 minutes to clean the pet waste off the field before they can start their practice. So they need to have somebody walk around the field, which is, again, affects their schedule, affects the amount of time they can play or practice. And so that would be something they like to see addressed. Any questions?
Yeah, one question. Is other communities you work in, is it atypical to see kids join club teams rather than stick with the rec department teams? Or is that pretty typical around the area?
I think some communities are more successful than others in keeping them in their leagues. I would say Milton's not the only community losing kids to private travel groups. But certainly there's communities that are able to keep more kids. The fact that we're not practicing, like a number of coaches are either not practicing at all, having really limited practice once the season starts. Like I'm just trying to think of one, like youth football, flag football would like practice up until when the season starts, and then it's just games. They don't practice again. And so there was a number of coaches that came with either very similar story to that, or like one practice a week versus and one game a week. And they would like two practices a week, or they'd like to be able to work that out. Coaches, but if you do two practices a week across, I'm gonna make up a scenario, 40 teams, right? Now you've got 80 2-hour windows you need, or you could maybe have two teams practice together. So you have 40 2-hour windows that you need, but it's just not there for the field space. And so, and then it's just not there for these guys to be able to keep up with it from a maintenance level as well. So that's kind of the balancing that the rec groups have made in order to make it work.
So I think I just want to pick up a little bit now that we've given, there's a lot of data here and these guys distilled it down. But why did we go in and do this study? I think the original basis for getting Time Bond involved was we knew that there was too much programming in our town for this facilities. So they're going to come back, make us a recommendation. We think we need 4 rectangular fields, and they're all this data they're going to distill down and say, hey, these are the recommendations that we can do over a certain amount of time. Then they're going to come back to the commissioner, and then they're going to create a plan. So that is the next step. That is the next stepping stone. That they will create some conceptual plans, and that I'm sure it'll be a little bit more interesting on that. But we need the data, obviously, to help inform us to make some improvements to the existing facilities. And so I think even looking at this data, the good place to start is when our existing parks would be the 3, like Kelly would be probably like Middle Guile, and then Andrews, right? And so like that would probably be like our focus would be those 3 parks. And then as an addition to that is like, we know we need to expand. So how could we expand? That's the piece that Ryan, we were talking about. There's an open space and rec committee right now, just so everybody knows that work has started. It's been over 2 years. And what would happen is once they finish that gives us some opportunity to get state funded. We need to get that planning study done. It's basically an inventory of what's open spaces available in town. And so that will just give us unlock us an opportunity to figure out what we can even do to expand on additional fields if we want to. So I think they're kind of the 2-pronged approach here to see what can we do to the existing ones, and then what other opportunities are available in town to see what we can do to make some expansion, right? So that's the general goal here. And then obviously too, we're looking at this as over time, is this a 10-year master plan? And we check off a bunch of priorities. One key piece of this too, and as a couple folks in the room, Pete and Ted and I myself, we've been on the Community Preservation Committee, and that's been a huge benefit to our recreation in Milton. So some of the things that we look at that might be negative, some of the huge positive things have come out of the CPC, right? There's been dugouts at Kelly Field that, 4 dugouts are up and were erected this fall. So that's been one great benefit. There's talk about lighting. We put all LED lighting at the high school now. So not only is it energy efficient, and the sports teams now can, they have a lot less of a bill. That's just another positive thing. So in this study too, we'll track with the CPC, and the Parks Department can also use that so that we have, hey, here's the priorities. We also kind of put the brakes on some things, like we were going to put in for a soccer field at Andrews, and we just said, hey, let's put on the brakes and do the studying first before we go invest $300,000 into a new field, because maybe there's another arrangement. So I just want to put that out there because, you know, there is a plan and a long-term plan. I'm obviously an architect and a planner, so that's the reason why you know, I want a longer vision and then we kind of figure out the priority list to kind of pick a way for commissioners now and in. Great.
What about the public meeting? After that, is there any other questions about our process?
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about strategy to make sure, I think to your point, that there is balance with some of the, maybe not the like highest number responses and how you plan to like filter some of the results so that there is that balance that the community is looking for.
To me, that's a lot of intent work. I'm looking at the comments. There's that breakdown there that you guys can't see. That we have a lot of commentary for folks on what they're looking for. And we're gonna try and take key elements from each one of those and work them into any of the parks we're doing improvements for. So like, I don't wanna get too far ahead of myself, but Andrews Park is already a park we're looking at. We haven't been able to present what we're looking at for the rec commission. But we certainly have our eye on opportunities for passive recreation facilities. And I think there's a lot of opportunities in parks where baseball fields and multi-purpose rectangular fields are really big space eaters, but what they leave along the side of them is a lot of, none of these properties in Milton are perfect squares, right? Where area was developed at a time when they didn't do that. And so when you put a large rectangular field in the middle of a park, there's a lot of facilities, a lot of space on the side for these opportunities. And so what we're gonna do is we'll probably put a list together of what we heard for passive recreation and prioritize them based on the number of comments we saw for each one. And then anytime we do a park improvement, we're gonna try, or anytime we show a conceptual park improvement, I should say, we'll try to identify 2 or 3 that we can fit at the park. And if it's a facility that can take more, we'll keep working on more of them. And then we'll have to prioritize those. You know, Rob's talking about a 10-year plan for our park facility. Well, you may not bite off an entire park improvement all in one shot. You may take one passive recreational improvement and one sport recreational improvement. But what you have on at that time will be a conceptual improvement. Where are we going in 10 years? So that you don't build a passive recreation facility where a multi-purpose rectangular field goes. So we'll be working with the parks group. One of the interesting things, like I shouldn't say I don't know, but I don't know what the town's strategy is with dogs and dog parks. Every municipality handles that a little bit different. So we'll have to talk about, is there a facility that's more ideal? Like, you know, some communities don't want those facilities near schools, or they don't want them near certain other facilities. So we'll have to just strategize on that a little bit. But certainly that's something we've heard a lot about in the survey. So we'll prioritize them and then try to find opportunities in each park improvement to include some of them.
Just one other thing I'd add, there's the Manning Park option that has a lot of grass. It's very, not used a ton. What passive things could we maybe use there too?
Help me on Manny's parking lot.
That's, I
Over the
think,
expressway.
Over the
Yeah.
expressway.
It's just a green space, but
Okay.
again,
No, don't.
but it's under this.
Yeah, it's under
It's under the
state. Got it.
town.
Got it.
It's not the
Yeah.
park department.
Yeah. So I will say, it's tough because like when we went through this, what actually the commissioners had control over isn't with this town. There's many private, like as was said, we use many private facilities, there's many state facilities, there's DCR, right? So some things we don't have control of. So that's why I mentioned like those are our 3 biggest, right? We all know Kelly, Andrews, and kind of the high school are the 3 biggest that we probably can make the biggest improvements to. And then like just going back to these guys, like I will say, one of my favorite parks around the area is Kincaid Park. Our daughter plays soccer there quite a bit. But what's nice about it is that there's a jogging track. And for anybody who knows, there's a jogging track, there's beautiful greenery. It's just a really nice park that there's a mix of recreational facilities as well as sports. Yeah, it's in Quincy. Yeah.
my daughter has practice there right now.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's a beautiful park. It's pretty recent, but and there's also like exercise equipment around too, right? And playground, and there's lights too. I'm sure there was significant investment there, but it's a great park. So,
Sure. Is there, you guys present back to the town any data on property values, town rankings, things, metrics that go into towns that have these services, capabilities, features, anything that would be useful data to kind of help the town see, okay, if we had X, Y, and Z, this is what it tangibly means to.
One of the parts of our report will be a benchmarking for the community, like where do you stand for number of fields based on your population space. There's also some nationwide standards based on population. I can't think of the group right now, so I'm just gonna bail out and say nationwide. But there's a group that puts together some standards based on X population. We would anticipate you having X number of these type of fields or X number of these type of facilities. And so we'll provide that information in the report for sure. And I think you have a question.
You touched on synthetic fields that one field will replace 3 natural turf. I imagine those are rectangular fields. Are they ever baseball or softball, or is that not really? We do not really see that around the area.
So certainly we build synthetic turf, baseball and softball fields. What I would say is that the use type on multi-purpose rectangular fields lends itself to tearing up natural turf more often. Baseball and softball, the majority of the rough use is on the clay infield mix, which creates a different maintenance issue for these guys, but it doesn't show up in sand of turf issues. Usually you'll find 3 holes in the outfield where the outfielders stand and they dig their heels in a little bit. But often we don't find as many of the turf issues there. But certainly, when you talk about opportunities here on a community that needs field space, you may see a strategy from us where we overlay a multi-purpose rectangular field with a baseball field outfield, so that we're gaining as much possible use out of that facility as possible. Any other question?
Yeah, I first of all, I just want to thank the park commissioners for getting this study done. I think it's a great way to just take a step back and look at all of the needs that are in town and coming up with a plan for how to get where we want to be. So thank you for doing this. One question that I have is about maintenance. And for the natural grass fields in particular, wondering sort of where are we now relative to what should be done to maintain the fields, and was that part of your study?
We had a conversation with Kevin about what you're doing on a regular basis, and I would say the fact that one of them, I want to say all of them, but I'm probably lying. The majority of your fields are irrigated.
Yep.
And the maintenance program that I talked through with Kevin was really kind of ahead of a lot of communities. You're doing a lot for the amount of staff you have and the number of fields you have. And so, I think type of maintenance wise, you're great. I think there was a conversation about, field striping and stuff like that, which obviously based on our conversation of our question about more staffing could help kind of that maintenance issue out. But as far as sand of natural turf, you're doing a lot of the things that we would recommend for. It's just a question of how do you keep up with thousands of young kids running around and with cleats on. And
I think that's the biggest, there's so much programming for these fields that, Kevin does a pretty good job managing the sports leagues, because we know like this spring, we've got a ton of water, right? And so if we let these kids play when the fields aren't in the shape that they should be played on, they could be ruined for an entire season, which they have in the past. So I think Kevin does a great job managing that, because we want the kids to go out and play too, but a lot of it's weather related with natural turf.
one of the things we'll include in the report is just an itemized list of what we would anticipate being the maintenance strategy on a natural turf field. And that just be a tool for Kevin for saying like, I'm not making this up, or here's what we need to do, and also help justify that stacking desire.
And there's even like getting back to, there's kind of a mix too, even for like softball. I know on Kelly, we've had issues with drainage on the softball field there. We have new dugouts, but the field last year was very unplayable because it was there's puddles, and if you go by there now, there's puddles. But that's going to get turned over, and we're going to use a stone dust, for instance, instead of using clay. The stone dust while it's not like the most ideal thing surface, it will absorb water and kids can play better. So I think we're also doing things like that.
Thanks for doing this. It's good to get sort of the internal update. Just I was intrigued by the funding reference. And in particular the open space master plan, like how does that fit in this work and where does that tie in town wise?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I'm trying to collaborate as much as possible with the planning department. As you guys might know, we now have a new town planner and an assistant town planner. And so the open space and rec committee that was formed, and it was probably over 2 years ago now, there was a long layoff when their planning department went away. And so the reason why I pretty much started this meeting is Horsley Witten was the consulting group that was doing that study originally. And so I had talked to them specifically about this and said, hey, why are we not, does this cover also recreational in more detail? And they said, no, you really need to do a recreational master plan. So what this other plan does is basically it inventories open space throughout the town, right? So that we can unlock potential opportunities to see. And I think we would get into the point of like, what's the value of some of the land that's available as well. I even spoke, so just this week too, I spoke and figured out, is there even private land that we could potentially unlock? And so we're gonna keep our eye open, as we kind of go through this. And we do have the CPC here as well. And CPA funds can be used to acquire land and you can use they can be used for recreational facilities. So that is a method that is possible. Yeah.
Thanks. I agree. This is great. I really appreciate all the work you guys did. Thank you very much. So, is there a conversation around acquiring, the Laboret land? Because that's about to go up for sale. So I realize this is above the parks level, but that might be a collaborative thing to talk about as a town, because that solves actually other problems too, but that would be additional land. I don't know if
There's no fields there, right, is there?
Huh?
Is there? No, there's no.
I don't think they're fields, but there's a lot of land.
Yeah. Well, this is the reason to do the study and to come out and say, hey, we have a need here. Let's go back to, the select board. Let's go talk to town meeting members. So, that's basically our plan ahead, is to say, hey, we have a charge here. There's a real need. Let's figure out what we can do. So there's only so much we can do with our existing parks. There's another piece of this, and I would love to unlock that and figure out what the opportunities are. So we're gonna have to rely on not just us, but we're gonna have to rely on other folks in town to push that forward.
Maybe it's more for Kevin, but how about, I understand, I know it's CPC funds, I know, town money, but the sports organizations give so much money per year for players to use the fields. Is there any opportunity for, this plan going out to have the organizations? I know that you guys do a lot of work and how much we pay for different things, but how much more can the sports organizations pay or fund different pieces of this project or other private money? Because I think that's where like $10 a player is like nothing really. Like, I mean, I just like, I know we as an organization, we're ready for, funding more things. And so like, that's where I like to have some consideration for like the sports organizations to really like be accountable for some of this too, because I think they should be.
So we do that $10. I know it hasn't changed in a while, but we do that not to, put another burden on the parents, it's for the initiation, the registration fee for these kids, but it's something we think about to move up, but I mean, some of these projects that we've done, groups like the CPA projects. So the lighting project, softball and baseball kicked in. out of the above what came from CPA. Parks Department kicked in, so yes, we do have groups kick into projects that we have going on, especially with the CPA projects.
Yes.
And just in talking about library, I know that Monmouth plays at Andrews, they have their games there.
Yeah.
So is there any in-kind?
That's a good question.
Yeah, they do.
Okay,
They do.
They do.
They do. Yep.
Yes.
I just asked, I don't know what from Council on Aging, and across the street is an old basketball court.
Yes. So
I never seen anybody there, but it seems it's not that much land, but
So it's a good point, and there's actually a CPA project happening right now, so. One of the respondents here is that, hey, we really want more basketball. I'm thinking it's probably more basketball courts outside as well. There's actually a project that came to the CPA this year, and there's gonna be not only bocce ball courts, but as well as like redoing this basketball court. And I think it actually was a project last year, and then we didn't have enough funding for it, so they came back. And that land is actually in control by the select board, I believe. And so Nick Milano had kind of like put in for the funding for it, but you'll start to see that too. I don't know do you know, Kevin, when that project's gonna happen?
Right after July 1.
So basically where CPA funds, it has to go to the town meeting to get approved. The committee basically recommends all the projects. It comes before town meeting in May, and then the funds are released in July. So July 1st, a lot of these projects will start to get ahead, and Kevin's been great to kind of spearhead a lot of these projects. Yes.
So on those first slides, the most respondents were parents of kids who play. And I wonder if there's been any thought to fundraising through communities and parents. So I've been a fundraiser before, but the notion, if you go to a big fundraiser, there's always fund and need. And for instance, I live near Shields Park. The bases are a catastrophe if there was and that can't be that much. So if the notion would be to put maybe one of those little thermometer things in the parks and say, if you donate this amount of money, that will get new bases. If you donate, sort of the notion of funding the need in the neighborhoods where these parks are.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great point, and I don't think if we're talking about improvements here, we're probably talking multi-million dollars worth of funding to make some of these improvements. So that's why I said it's going to be over a 10-year term, and there's definitely going to have to be private and public type of funding. So I think we're going to have to latch on to both and figure it out. As Jamie said, we also, just the way when I grew up, I had most of our town sports were underneath the town department, right? And in Milton, it's all running as nonprofits, pretty much. There's a few things that we offer, the Parks and Rec offer, but there's all these other nonprofits that are out there. I served on the Milton softball board. My wife's the president of Milton Soccer, and so these groups also have investment, and so I think that's her point is like, how can these groups also help? They also helped fund this study. So I will say that the funding for the study came from CPA funds, but it also came from some of these sports groups. So that's why they obviously have a big stake within this. So to your point, kind of go back to them and lean on them to see what they can do for improvements too. I think it's gonna take kind of a combination of both. Because we don't necessarily want put this back on the taxpayer either. I think a lot of these are gonna be, they will be used for the whole community, but a lot of them, are gonna be used by sporting groups essentially. Pete.
I want to speak up a little bit for the passive users. I know a lot of this study revolves around the sports fields and things like that. And naturally, the greatest amount of people replying are athletically related because there's all these organized coaches and they reach out to the parents. And so by far the largest number of responses are the athletic field and things like that. I was a bit disappointed in the survey on the lack of coverage for passive recreation. There were a couple little lines, but for example, you know, do you use Turner Pond? Yes, and that's the end of it. But there's no talking about condition or possible, you know, other things that could be used and improvements that could be made. And, you know, I want to make sure, I was delighted to see the one graphic that was surprisingly the high number of people that responded and said they used the passive use. And not just passive use at the athletic facilities, but the Turner's Pond, the Pope Pond, Manning Pond, another Pine Tree Brook. You know, there's a lot of use there that should be considered, and improvements should perhaps rank a little higher, given that the number of respondents are just automatically more for active recreation. I also
well, what I would say, Pete, is that there's a lot of passive use in Milton. You know, there really is. But I think we need to incorporate it into existing parks, right? So while we're doing sports, I think, like I mentioned, Kincaid,
right.
There's opportunity there that we'll absolutely look to try to get as much passive use in the park.
As the parks. And the other thing that I would hope they would at least somehow work into this is there are some town parcels, like there's 6 acres down along the Neponset River that's town. There's this land that, in theory, if the middle school gets going, the park department is gonna get by the landfill.
Right.
And, you know, looking at, you know, as a possible future opportunities, I think, you know, we would be missing an opportunity if you didn't think about what those might accompany.
We brought Ryan, that was part
We
of
did
that.
bring him there.
For,
Which one?
Yeah. But
to, dump.
yeah, so we did go to some of those spots.
Yeah.
I mean, granted, I mean, you're right. I think we're looking through this because of us, you know, there's a sports lens to this and we see the need for it. But we absolutely have to go through more of the passive uses to be in this. We only have so much money. I think at some point, to your point, like, what do you do with that land? And I don't think that, you know, I don't think there's gonna be a lot that you can do with that land, because there's a lot of wetlands that are in that.
That's a whole other discussion.
That's a whole other stuff.
I do think, though, we want to balance. We've got 2 studies happening simultaneously.
Yes.
We've got this rec plan and the open space and rec plan.
Right.
And so while this was more recreation based on the athletic
Right.
facilities, we want to acknowledge that, yes, there needs to be passive use of these facilities. And so that's why you saw maybe this survey wasn't as passive heavy as you would have liked, but a lot of the facilities that you're talking about that are more strictly passive recreational uses should be picked up in that open space and rec plan. So hopefully when we marry those 2 together, and that's why we're kind of trying to work together, we'll be able to kind of put our survey data together with whatever the open space rec plan and kind of make sure that we're covering what you're identifying as this huge passive use.
And they are just starting that up, Pete. I think the planning board approved more funding so that open space and rec can finally get finished.
It's a lot of, I remember answering that 2 days ago. There's a lot of in the city.
Right. Right.
Previously.
Yeah.
It's more common question, not necessarily for this forum, Rob, to your point about only so much can be done with them. Whether town planning, select board, town meeting, the whole pilot program with our Curry's, their academy, it's a whole separate discussion, it's a big discussion, but I think for town planning, we have a field need. They have resources, just long-term planning for how do we solve the problems that we start with the St. Mary's private school has a field, if we could pay to put a new field in there, benefits them.
Yeah.
But it doesn't get used because they're at a session on the weekend. So like just high level of town planning, the partnership to solve a lot of problems with a nonprofit partner in town.
It's true.
Community.
Something
I think would be a win.
Yeah.
If you want them to pay taxes or whatever money you give to the town, that's not gonna happen, maybe,
Right.
but they have fields, is that a trade-off? Is that the
Yeah, maybe. And
So just, again, not for this commission, but just in general, it doesn't even part of the discussion.
And Kevin, maybe you can speak to this, but didn't Milton Academy just recently agree to allow some of the youth sports?
Yeah, they've stepped up big time this past 2 years, Milton Academy.
yeah, that's what I mean, and you can see it on like some of the data is Milton Academy over the last 2 years have.
Yeah, my organization reach out to God directly, but I think from a town level,
They would
how do we
be-
leverage that resource?
Yeah.
At a town level,
Yeah.
you know, on the town, because yes, our organizations are reaching out and calling
Right.
favors and using it, it's been great, but
Right.
I think from a town standpoint,
Right.
there's some buying power there to solve a couple of problems.
Right. And like you mentioned a great one, like St. Mary's. I think like Ralph Parent called me like probably a few weeks ago and he said, listen, I was talking to the director there, you know. It granted, I don't think we use it because the facility isn't that great, right? But to your point, could the town make an investment there? It gets challenging, right? Because they own the land, so that's where the challenge could come in. Like, could you put private groups go and put money in? I don't think like we could publicly put money into someone else's land, if that makes sense. Because like you can never, like for CPC funds, we would never be able to fund it because you need to own the land. So that's some of the challenge with that.
Any more?
We got a hand raised.
Everything.
It's like yours.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I was just curious. I mean, one issue you raised was
She sends out some shovels.
that a lot of teams are struggling to find practice areas. And it strikes me that maybe a lot of sports don't need a 100-yard field for practicing. I was particularly thinking about like Lower Guile, which is destroyed by youth football in the fall. And it just seems to me it's all practice. And they just line up on those yard markers and dig trenches. And if you could find a place to put those kids, you'd have a 100-yard field there. You know, if you could have just a 30-yard field someplace else to break things up a bit. So I don't know if when you're looking for field space, you would consider, 30 or 40 yards a pretty useful place for the town to have.
I would say a lot of your rec groups are finding whatever little piece of grass they can play on. I can't tell you the number of times I heard in these conversations. I don't know what to call that little space, but it's but it's to the outfield of the soccer field, and it's not quite the baseball field, and it's not in the rectangular space. It's like by the light pole. A number of teams are playing that space as an opportunity, and so I think they are finding those 30 to 40 yard segments. As far as like, would the town want to fund a project for a 30 to 40 yard field just for youth football to tear up? I would say probably not, but that doesn't mean that there's not opportunities where we don't rotate fields or change wear patterns so that we don't ruin a field either. I think it's something we can talk about.
And I think that the general message here and what concerns me is like, listen, I'm involved with two heavy sports because my daughter plays two sports. But when I hear folks in town that, they play the field hockey can't even practice in town because there's just not field use. They just don't have access to fields. That becomes a real equity problem for me because it's just not right? So I think that's the absolute need to do this and find space because it's just, they need it. We need to find, because they are finding like little just pieces of grass to play where they really should be getting better facilities.
I think for the most part, the town does, the two softball teams will practice in the same field, two baseball teams will practice in the same field.
Right.
Kevin doesn't want to hear this, but last night there was a baseball team practicing behind PS. They just take the fields that
Yeah, you take whatever you can
and-
take,
yeah,
whatever you
yeah.
can take, right?
You should have heard the list from these coaches. Well, on Tuesdays I play over here. I don't know how the kids find the field they're supposed to be
Right.
playing at. It's gotta be
Right, I mean, kids are playing soccer on Peverly Park, which that's passive, Pete, right? Like, but they're playing soccer on it because they don't have anywhere else to play. So it really is there is a big need.
I have another hand.
We also use City Field. But
Yeah, true.
Park, Boston.
Yeah.
I know our younger families doing, they're having to go out of town.
Right.
All day, they're like, what?
Right. Yeah, the public should know that like groups now are having to find fields elsewhere outside of Milton and use them because they just don't have it here. So they're going further out. Softball had fields in Boston and soccer was using .32 for a long time. That's been taken back. So it's been a challenge to find how do you replace that program?
Colleen McCarthy's.
Colleen.
Oh, hey everyone. Sorry, I came in on the tail end and I just, I think it was Matt Deeb who made the comment about St. Mary's. I'm just curious, has the town ever approached the school about using the field? And if so, I'm just curious what the response was. And the reason I ask, they are always doing fundraisers looking to raise money. And so I'm just curious if we've asked and what their response has been.
I don't think there has been a discussion. And yeah, I think it would be who of us to follow up and figure out if it's even an option, you know?
Yeah, I think just a suggestion. I have two children there. I think it's probably a worthwhile pursuit.
Okay.
Yeah, they're constantly looking to raise money. So I thought it was a good idea. I think it was Matt Deeb that brought it up. So just wanted to throw that in there.
You'll be split from the rest and then leased back for further use.
Yeah, this is where we get into,
Yeah,
you know, the
that's
challenge
what-
is private and
Figured out.
yeah, but it's worth looking into, you know?
I mean, yeah, and I don't know if I don't know, understood about the CPC, if parents, you know, whether it would come out of registration fees, if there's a portion of that with sports programs that you could segment, but I'm sure the town could get creative, but yeah, and maybe they wouldn't be open to it, but it might be a worthwhile pursuit.
The challenge here is like private organization using a private field and then the town's involved somewhere. Not saying that it couldn't be done, but that's gonna be the hurdles that we're gonna have to.
Yeah, got it. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Is that everybody online? Great. If nobody else has questions. Appreciate everybody being really interactive tonight and asking questions. That was awesome. And we'll certainly be back in front of you guys after we get a chance to talk to Parks about improvement and we'll do another presentation.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.